Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Cure CMD's college conversation. We're very grateful to have the opportunity to dive into the complex and intimidating journey of post-secondary education. First, we're going to kick us off by screening a short docu-film, Liam, A Rare College Experience, featuring CMD community member Liam Miller, which showcases a day in the life of a college student who uses a wheelchair. Then Annie will take us through the interactive session. You're in great hands with her. All right, I'll cue up the video.
When I started here, there was so many things that I didn't think I could do that I completely do now with ease. There's a sense of discovery and independence as well. It's also just a good feeling to know that you are your own person, that you don't always have to rely on other people for everything. I think it's important that you grow as a person and that you experience the world. My name is Liam Miller and I am a student at Tulkin University. I'm a junior studying computer science. I have Ulrich congenital muscular dystrophy. I believe it's called collagen 6 deficient related myopathies. So basically my arms and legs are contracted and I have weak muscles. My family has been a huge help and they've always been so supportive of everything I do. Obviously they expect me to be the best that I can be, but they never pressured me into doing anything that wasn't reasonable. But I think my independence started mainly around middle school and high school just because I had to do a lot of communicating with the teachers and the staff members and the nurses there at my schools. And I had to learn how to make it clear what I needed and be comfortable asking for things that I needed.
We would encourage him to be the one to send the email, make the phone call, whatever the case might be. And it might be so little, but each time you're building on it and becoming more comfortable with that. Leading into when Liam was 18, we knew he had to be as independent as he could be when he got to college.
And I think it's important that I started that at an early age. Maybe one of the other biggest things that kind of kicked off my independence was MDA Summer Camp. MDA Summer Camp is this camp that the Muscular Dystrophy Association provides. It was just an awesome experience for me in so many ways. And that's kind of where I learned how to be away from my parents and make my own decisions. And doing that for 12 years, I think really inspired me to want to live on my own and want to do things myself. The college that I go to, they've been extremely supportive of me and me trying to get my degree and me trying to be successful here. I've had a few bumps in the road for sure, but I don't think that is unique to me in any way. Just because I have a disability, I think every student who's ever gone to college has had some bumps in the roads.
He knew where he wanted to go and had applied early and was accepted. So while everyone else was still waiting for their acceptances, we were planning the whole year. We were planning, but it was going to visit the school and talking to they have an office of disabilities and sitting down with them. And I think our first conversation was an hour and a half, and she went through everything that they had on campus and the accommodations and what they could provide. He had to talk to the Office of Vocational Rehab. He had to talk to his healthcare health insurance to talk to a case manager and get that straightened away. So we had names and numbers, and his set up attendant care and nursing care. So he had different companies for that. And before he even got to campus, I think we had been there 10 times.
I have 12 hours a day of attendant care and then 12 hours a night of nursing care.
Make sure that he was all right, slept well with his other nurse. I make sure that he eats throughout the day, make sure that he's keeping up to, staying up to date on his homework, taking him grocery shopping if he ever needs to, or to the doctor, or back up with his parents. We go to hockey games sometimes for his team, so we'll take lifts or Ubers down to the games and stuff like that. Aleem's pretty independent. He's able to get to class by himself. He's able to cook for himself. I'm pretty much just here to spot check. And
typically what happens is my nurse comes in at 7 a.m. She gets me up in the Hoyer lift, gets me up, puts me in a shower chair that's typically right where I'm sitting, that she brings in from the bathroom. Right here I have a roll-in shower, which is really nice. It's flush with the ground, so I can just get my shower chair in there pretty easily. So I have my own shower chair that has wheels, so I can roll around the room whenever I need to. And then also behind this curtain, there's just a flat shower chair that's part of the room. And then over here, they actually have really nice bars that go around the toilet. And then probably my favorite feature of the bathroom is the size of the sink. It's perfect for me because I can get my knees right under it, and I can also reach the water faucet pretty easily. My first semester here was very easy for the most part. A lot of stuff I already knew, or it was very easy material. So I had a lot of free time. Now that the classes are a lot harder and there's more of them, I've definitely struggled to keep up. There are days where I absolutely have to just take a break, stop, get some sleep, take a nap, something like that, because I just don't have the energy. Now that I'm in college, I kind of wanted to start and, be as honest as I could be. But I think part of the honesty now is that I have to absolutely take advantage of the accommodations when they're there for me. And for me, my health is my first priority, because I know as soon as that starts to go down, it's not going to be good. So I want to be as healthy as possible. Every other day throughout the week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm allowed to go over to the recreation center they have here and play hockey, just practice for an hour and a half. Outside of Temple, I play in a wheelchair hockey team in the Philadelphia area. I've been playing on that team for 10 or 11 years. But every 2 years, we all get together and we play in this big tournament called the Power Hockey Cup. And this past summer was our first championship in that particular tournament. And that was just easily one of the best moments of my life.
Because I'm able to take the train home on weekends or into the city for doctor's appointments. There's typically a ramp either on the train already or one that they have to take off the platform. There's some planning that you have to do ahead of time so that you know which platforms are accessible and which ones aren't. But for the most part, most are accessible. So it's really nice to have this available because it's super convenient for me to get where I need to go.
You shouldn't be expected to be a pioneer in this. You should really be a copycat and then kind of adapt what information you get and learn how to use it for you. As I did, I talked to a lot of people already in college and figured out how it would work for me based on what they do. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and that includes people in your community, but also the people at whatever school you're looking at.
Everyone has nerves about college, and there's just no way around it. So that's natural for every parent. In fact, I almost felt like I had less nerves just because we had planned. Then, by the time Christmas rolls around, they're home on break, and you're like, wow, that went really fast. I mean, in the world of disability, we don't have the luxury of just being spontaneous. So it seems insurmountable at times, but it's like anything, getting into routine and just, making sure you have a plan in place.
I mean, obviously, I think you should be nervous about going to college, and I think you should be nervous about sending your kids to college. It's a very weird experience, and it's something completely new to a lot, I'm sure. But you should be at peace knowing that in the end, it's the person you're sending to college will definitely transform, and they will grow as a person and figure out how to be independent. And the good thing is there are always resources available, and especially in the Cure CMD community, there are always people available who are willing to talk and kind of explain their story and maybe guide you as well. The person I am now versus the person I am 3 years ago is a completely different person in a good way. And I think everybody who goes to college will experience that as well.
Having gone from helping him transfer into bed to him being able to do it himself, he's really grown up in front of me, and that's been something that's really, really been special to watch throughout my life.
So after college, I'd love to live in an apartment somewhere in Philadelphia and ask for a job, hopefully something with coding. I really enjoy that. I've met some great people. I've made a lot of great friends here. You know, I've had a lot of good experiences. I think everybody should be independent. I don't think they should be weighed down just because they have some kind of disability that prevents them from doing some things. I think overall you can adapt and you can work around those challenges, and you can improve as a person, and you can be your own person. I think everybody has a right to be who they want to be, and it has a right to be who they are. And I think being here at college has really taught me who that is and how to go about doing that. And I just think everybody should try it if they have the chance. It's really important.
All right. Annie, I'll hand it over to you.
I just wanted to say too that I have seen that video a couple times now, and for me, even as a person who works sort of in this college transition space, there's always new questions and new things that emerge for me. And I wanted to share with you guys too, because I think I told Avery this when we were talking about screening that film. This is just a random piece of information. Temple University just this past year announced an endowment, a family endowment fund that's specifically for students with physical disabilities who go to Temple. And I just put a link in the chat too. I think it was a several $1 million endowment that will be available in something like $400,000 increments each year for students with physical disabilities to use to help foster independence on campus. So just putting that out there, because that's sort of a unique piece about Temple in general. But I'm going to go ahead and jump in and introduce myself. So I'm Annie Tulkin. I'm the founder and director of Accessible College. At Accessible College, I support students with physical disabilities. So that includes students who use wheelchairs, mobility device users, ambulatory wheelchair users, sometimes wheelchair mobility device users. And I support students with chronic health conditions as well. And that sort of ranges through a whole spectrum of things, autoimmune disorders, POTS, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, rare diseases and conditions, diabetes, a whole host of conditions that might impact a student's ability to engage in the college setting. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about, my work tonight, and tell you a little bit about the transition to college as a student with a physical disability. And I'll also let you know too that I have a program with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And I actually have, through that program, a couple students who I'm working with who have CMD and are engaged in the young adult group here. And other types of muscular dystrophy as well. So I'll share information about that program too, because students with any type of paralysis, and paralysis is a big tent term, can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation to sort of start thinking about this transition to college piece. So I got into this work because I used to be the associate director of the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University, and the Disability Support Office there is called the Academic Resource Center. And you'll notice that in the video too, Liam and his mom talked about the Disability Services Office. So every college or university has a Disability Support Office. It might have a different name. It could be Student Accessibility Services, Disability Support Services, Academic Support Services. So you can find that usually by going to the college's website and then just putting in the search of disability support. That will usually bring it up. So when I was at Georgetown, I worked specifically with students with physical disabilities and health conditions, undergraduate, graduate, medical school students, so a whole range of students. And one of the things that really emerged in that work for me was that there were so many students who were coming in who didn't really know what types of accommodations they could request. They hadn't really thought about independent living, continuity of care, how they were going to manage their medications, get the services and supports that they need. And so I started Accessible College to sort of address that gap for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. And I just wanted to start with some sort of ground truthing, some information that might be surprising or interesting for people. So we know statistically that 19% of undergraduate college students report having a disability. So that includes learning disabilities, ADD, mobility impairments or physical disabilities, psychiatric or mental health conditions, and health conditions, chronic health conditions. That also means that at any given college or university, between 10 and 20% of the undergraduate population is actually receiving accommodations. And we'll talk about what that means in the college setting, but generally, just so that you all know, when a student goes to college, they have to self-disclose. So they have to go to the Disability Support Office, provide documentation, and request accommodations, which is different from how things may have worked in the K through 12 setting. We also know that approximately 7% of college students who report having a disability indicate that they have a physical disability or a mobility impairment. And I should also say that encompassed in physical disabilities is also sensory impairments, so blindness, visual impairments, hearing impairments. And the data is not super recent. So that second data set, the 7% number comes from 2011. Part of this is because, the federal government only does these updates every once in a while. And the challenge is that universities all categorize their students in disability support offices in different ways. So the numbers aren't always reflective of what the reality is on a campus. So I'm a member of a group called AHEAD, the Association of Higher Education and Disability, and that's all of the disability support offices in the United States. So we know that people are seeing the biggest increase in requests for accommodations for mental health conditions. And most colleges are sort of used to seeing students with learning disabilities and ADD. They might be less used to seeing students with physical disabilities and mobility impairments, which is why it's even more important for students with physical disabilities to be better prepared going into these conversations so that you know what your rights are, what to ask for, and what to think about as you're engaging in these conversations or thinking about going to college. So the ADA. When a student transitions from high school to college, the laws that govern accommodations change. So, and I'll share this in a little bit, but in high school, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that's the law that gives you an IEP. If you're in a public school, if you're in a private school, you might have a academic plan, or you might also have a 504 plan. And those two things come from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, hence the name 504 plan. But when a student goes to college, those things don't go with you. You don't take your IEP to college. You don't take your 504 plan to college. You have to request accommodations under the ADA through the Disability Support Office. And the ADA defines a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So the key question for the people in the disability support office is to start to think to themselves, how does this condition impact the student? And when you're going to college, the impacts might be larger than they were when you were living at home with your guardians and with your parents. So there might be residential accommodations, there might be dining accommodations, transportation accommodations, and we'll talk a little bit about what that actually looks like. I mentioned this before, but we know that disability support offices nowadays are more used to seeing students with learning disabilities, ADD. They have fewer students with physical disabilities and health conditions. And we also know that students with physical disabilities and health conditions have unique needs. That's why we're here having this conversation on a Friday night. I mentioned sort of the laws that govern accommodations in the college setting. But just to sort of reiterate this, because I think a lot of families aren't paying attention to how things are different. You're entitled to your education in high school, which means that you have to have that education. You can have a K through 12 education. They also provide services and accommodations in the high school setting. So services might be things like a one-on-one aide, a para-educator, occupational therapy, orientation and mobility training, that all might be included in an IEP. It could be a modified curriculum too, where they make some changes to the curriculum. Those things don't happen in college. ADA provides for reasonable accommodations, and I'm doing air quotes here because reasonableness is subjective in a lot of ways, right? So it might be sort of based on the physical space. It could be based on the program that the student is entering into at the university. So it's a little bit more nuanced and less cut and dry than a IEP process in the K through 12 setting. Also, colleges don't provide one-on-one aides, para-educators. If a student needs a personal care attendant, that's something that they will have to retain, hire, and supervise independently. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we're going on. The other law that sort of emerges and maybe surprises students and families is FERPA, which is the Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And that's the law that protects the students' educational records. So that means the student's grades, basically all correspondence from the university will go to the student once the student signs that dotted line, unless the student and the family decide to sign a FERPA waiver. Usually that's with the registrar's office so that parents, guardians, family members can have access to the student's educational record. And there might be some reasons that students want to have their parents or guardians sort of as a part of that process, just to keep on top of things. In terms of documentation, that's also another thing. I mentioned that IEPs, 504 plans don't go with the student to college. So you're not necessarily going to get the same accommodations that you had in the high school setting in the college setting. Each college has their own set of documentation guidelines. They're usually pretty similar from place to place, but if your student has a learning disability, it might be a neuropsych evaluation that has been done within the last 3 to 5 years. They definitely want to see, most universities want to see adult scales used in that assessment. If the student also has a mental health condition, maybe it's a co-occurring mental health condition, anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder, they might want to see a documentation from a psychologist. Or if your student has a chronic health condition, a physical disability, a rare disease, and another type of condition that might impact them in the college setting, most universities at that point are looking for a letter from the student's healthcare provider that has the diagnosis, an outline of the functional limitations, which is also ADA language. So again, going back to how does the condition impact the student and how will it impact them in the university setting? And then any recommendations for accommodation so that the disability support office personnel can use that to sort of guide or inform the types of accommodations that they might be able to grant. So if you have questions about the documentation guidelines, usually you can find those on the Disability Support Office's website. And if you wanted to connect with the Disability Support Office, you could also call them up or email them to ask what type of documentation is required. to request accommodations. And I'll go ahead and say this now. I would say for all of the students I work with who have physical disabilities, who use wheelchairs, I strongly encourage students to connect with disability support offices prior to applying to the university, and absolutely prior to committing. The reason is because universities provide varying accommodations, and the care in which they provide those accommodations really can be different at each place and each space, sort of based on who is in that office, how they're approaching their job, their familiarity with the types of needs that you might have. And that can be really impactful on the student experience. It's like buying several new cars for some colleges when you're thinking about the money that you're putting in. You want to make sure that you're getting a product that's going to be a good fit for you holistically, right? And part of that is vetting the services, just like you're looking at the university to see if it's got the right major and it's got all the things that you're interested in. And they might be looking at you, the student, and saying, you know, does the student's application look good to us? You should also be vetting them, right? So it's a reciprocal vetting that should be going on so that you're making an informed decision in the end. And these things often take time. So it's really important to get thinking about this and get started on these pieces early on so that you have enough time to process this and wrap your head around it. I wanted to share just some accommodation considerations that are specific for physical disabilities. And as I'm talking to guys, like there aren't a ton of slides here. We're getting towards the end of my slides, but if things are emerging in your brain and you want to make sure you ask that question, you can put it in the chat, or you can hold on to that question until I'm done and ask it then. That's fine. So just some general things. I like to think about things in terms of academics, so like classroom accommodations, residential, recreation, dining, and then programmatic. So some of the typical things, maybe you even have some of this stuff or your student has them in high school, could be like extra time on a test. And that might be because the student uses a speech to text software, or they need someone to support them as a scribe. So you might need extra time. Priority registration is another sort of accommodation that I usually recommend that students talk to the disability support office about and request. That means that the student would get to register before everybody else, so that usually there's a need to have that flexibility so the student doesn't get stuck with all 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. classes, because as most of us know, if there's care attendants coming in, if there's a morning routine that has to happen, that takes time. And so having classes that are a little bit later in the morning could be a really helpful thing, or having classes that are far enough apart throughout the day so the student has time for rest and recovery. Laptop in the classroom is another accommodation request. You might think, oh, professors don't all let students have laptops, and there are some that don't. So you might have to request that. And that could be because you're using assistive technology in the classroom. It could be for note-taking reasons. So there's a lot of reasons a student might need that. Classroom relocation is actually one that emerges a lot. Every college campus is required to be ADA compliant, right? And I'm doing air quotes for that, ADA compliant. We all know in this group that what is technically compliant may not always be user-friendly for every single person, right? So if you're a person who needs to use push buttons and the technical compliance standard is a lever handle, like the lever handle is not going to work for you. You need the push button, right? And so there might be the need to relocate some classes so that the student is actually able to access their classes. So the classes are moved to a room or a space or spaces that are work for them. And the hope is that you're choosing a university that will work with you to determine what spaces are actually going to be accessible and usable and user-friendly for the student. Flexible attendance is another one that comes up. In high school, if you miss a couple days or a week of class because something emerges or you have a medical issue or whatever, typically your teachers will work with you to make up that work. In college, it's a little bit different. So you have to navigate that with individual professors. And also there are some nuances around sort of attendance policies for the entire class and then figuring out if you're in a class that's building incrementally and you've missed a week or two of class, can you actually make up that work? If the professor feels that it compromises the curricular goals of the course, they don't have to grant the accommodation. So there are some nuances there where students might also be thinking about just looking at withdrawal policies, medical leave policies, so that you know what those policies are at that university. But usually, if a student is approved for this accommodation and they have an upfront conversation with their professors and they create that good rapport, students and professors can work those things out with the support of the Disability Support Office, hopefully. So those are just some examples of accommodation considerations for academics. There's a lot more. It might be like, having an accessible desk in a classroom too, which you'd think would be sort of a no-brainer accommodation, but doesn't always appear unless the student requests it. Residential accommodation, so it might be an accessible room. I have personal care attendant listed here, and I see a question about PCAs. Totally happy to talk about PCAs. I do a lot of work with students who need personal care attendants and do a lot of coaching around sort of the ins and outs of that. First off, I should say there are only 2 colleges in the United States that have some level of personal care attendant services built into their programs. One, and I'll share a bunch of resources too, so you don't have to feverishly write this down, but one is the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. They have a personal care attendant program that's built into a dorm. It's called Beckwith. The dorm is universally designed and accessible. There is a fee for service tacked onto that. And I think you can see on their website, but I think it's about 7 hours of PCA care. And then if you need more, you have to navigate that with individual personal care attendants who work there. The other school is Wright State in Dayton, Ohio, and that one is a lot different. They have a personal care attendant sort of kiosk where a student can go during the middle of the day to get support with toileting or with other sort of personal care needs. So that's very different too, that from the U of I version. Anywhere else, any other college or university, the student has to hire, manage, and just maintain personal care attendants independently. So that's something that's really important to think about. And I have a bunch of resources on that, so we'll talk about that. Accessibility of the space for the student, making sure that you're having conversations about the specific needs of the student. I think in Liam's video, he showed that he had brought his own shower chair. There was a built-in shower chair that didn't work for him, so he brought his own. I think that there's some modifications that sometimes colleges will make to actually meet the need of the student. Lower floor, ground level floor, you think that might be a no-brainer thing, but it's not always the case. So asking for those things, part of that is around emergency evacuation. The dorm that I lived in college, we had tons of fire alarms, lots of burnt pizzas in the middle of the night. And that might be a common experience. So, making sure that the student is on the lower floor, the ground floor, so they don't have to worry about being carried downstairs it can be a huge, just mitigation technique to support the student. Recreation accommodations. So adaptive fitness equipment could be a reasonable accommodation, making sure that the student can access the student center facilities that they want. If your student is into gaming and they have gaming consoles for every student and there isn't adaptive equipment, you can request that as an accommodation. Dining hall, it might be allergy dietary things that your student needs. If your student has a specific diet, if they're tube fed, if there are other things, there might be some other pieces to navigate, but that would all be through the Disability Support Office and dining services. It could be support in the dining hall. So if your student is relatively independent, but they can't manage to hold a tray, there might be a way to have someone help them sort of get that food or get that stuff too. And then programmatic accommodations. A huge part of college life is taking advantage of all the things that happen on campus, like concerts and speakers and anything that's fun or whatever. But sometimes accessibility is an afterthought for some of these things. So when I visit a college campus, and I'm not a college consultant, I do work alongside them a lot, but I do live in a space. I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland, so there's lots of universities, and I was just at UMD's, University of Maryland's campus walking around with my kid last week, and I noticed lots of flyers on campus, and all of the flyers that I saw had accessibility statements on them, which was fantastic because it said, if you need an accommodation to attend this event, here's who you contact. And I look at some of those things and how would I navigate this space, you know, if I needed an accessible route to get to a space. So it could be accessible seating, it could be accessible transportation, just asking these questions up front so that your student, it doesn't have any surprises and they can engage in the things that they want to engage in, or if you are the student that you want to engage in. So I wanted to leave tons of time for conversation, but I also wanted to share that I mentioned I have the project with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. I'm going to put in some information into the chat, and there will be a QR code in the second too. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can connect with me and I'll put up my information, or you can connect with the Reeve Foundation directly. They do an intake. So students with any type of paralysis can work with me for free for up to 3 hours to start to think through these accommodation pieces, the questions that you should be asking disability support offices, and sort of engaging on that planning. I also have private clients that I meet with too. I do consulting for schools, and I just created a new course that's on my website, and it's preparing students with physical disabilities and health conditions for college. It's great for parents, for educators, for healthcare providers too. So you can find out more information about that by going to my website. And so my website is accessiblecollege.com. I put, I see a question about muscular dystrophy. Yes, so muscular dystrophy paralysis is a big tent term, and I've supported several students through the Reeve Foundation program who have different types of muscular dystrophy, Duchenne, CMD, and a couple other types of muscular dystrophy as well. So yeah, so that could be a great resource for people. I'll put the link to the resource sheet in the chat in a second when I can kind of consolidate my screen, but if people aren't QR code savvy, there will be a link as well. And I shared it with Avery too, so that she could send it out to people too. And on that link, there's actually some great resources. I wrote a guide for the Reeve Foundation on navigating the transition to college with paralysis. It's perfect for this group. And there are 2 pieces I wrote for New Mobility magazine. One is about bringing a personal care attendant to college, so you'll see that. And one is about just navigating college as a wheelchair user. Oh, Avery helped me out. She put in my little link. Yeah, so that's a link to the sheet, and there's a ton of information on there. Yeah, so you guys can follow me too. I do a ton of free events too, so follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and we can connect that way as well. But I will stop talking now because I saw some questions come in, and I'm gonna put my screen down, and here we go. Stop that share, and then we can have a more informal chit chat. So let's see. So someone asked a question about finding, hiring, and paying for 24/7 care attendant needs. I'm sure that's a burning question that a lot of people have. The short answer is it depends, right? So first, if your student uses a Medicaid waiver or has Medicaid services in your state, they may be able to keep those services and use that to hire a care attendant through an agency at the school that they go to. If a student chooses to go out of state for school, that becomes a little bit more nuanced and challenging. Some states have reciprocity agreements, so you can go through the hoops, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Like, it is a lot of work because it's not a super common thing that Medicaid offices are used to dealing with. And so that sometimes emerges as a challenge for people. Other students will hire independent nurses, or they'll hire other students, nursing students, OT, PT students. It sort of depends on the level of care that your student needs. If they need a skilled nurse, if they need, a certain level of care. Some students I work with bring a family member with them, or a a friend to act as a PCA. And colleges have sort of varying rules, regulations, and policies around personal care attendants on campus. So I'm not sure if that answered your question completely. But I'm happy to, if you have more questions, you guys can talk too. You can unmute yourselves and jump in. That would be fine as well. And I just put in the chat the article from New Mobility about personal care attendants in college, which gives sort of different models. And one of the people who's in the article is my friend Lauren, who has muscular dystrophy and lives in Michigan, and talked about her experience actually using her Medicaid waiver, and she was also able to hire students on campus too. And there's a great picture of her as well. So let's see. And then the other piece of this puzzle too about paying for personal care attendants. So the payment piece is a little bit all over the place too. So Medicaid might cover it completely. If that's not the case, there might also be funds from your state vocational rehabilitation program. Every state, it has a different name. It might be Department of Rehabilitation Services or Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Those are the common ones, OVR, DORS. So there might be funds available through state vocational rehabilitation as well. Most of the students I work with are also eligible for supplemental security insurance, SSI. So SSI can give students, $800 and some a month too, that could be used towards personal care needs. I've had students who I've worked with who have appealed the financial aid that the school has offered them and been able to get more funds to put towards personal care attendants. And then there are independent scholarships too. So I mentioned that Temple now has this endowment for students with physical disabilities. And there are other schools too that have scholarships as well for students with physical disabilities. So you have to be 18 to apply for SSI. There was a question in the comments. I'm not an SSI expert. I actually send people over to a woman I know whose name is Deborah McFadden, and happy to share her information if people want to email me. She deals a lot with SSI and provides support for families around that. And in the CMD community, there might be somebody else too who's also an SSI expert. There's a question in here about campus dorm life. Oh, that is a good question. So it says, I assume there are no roommates and you're in a room alone. Seems like there might be a loneliness factor. I'm going to take a sip of water. It's a great question. It's a lot to unpack, and here's why. So college dorms are very different now. When I went to college and I was in like the cheapest dorm that there was, we had a community bathroom down the hall, and our rooms were like 8 feet by 8 feet and sort of cells in a way. Nowadays, there's so many variations on how dorms are set up, right? So sometimes they are suite style. Sometimes like students will have their own room and then they'll share a common area with a couple other students. So usually if a student has a lot of equipment and has a personal care attendant, they might be getting a single room or a double room that is made into a single. So that could be a piece of the puzzle. Generally, that student would also be asking for an ensuite bathroom, right? So that it's accessible, so they can use the bathroom and do all the toileting things that they need in privacy and not have a community bathroom situation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're alone. I often joke that like dorms, if you want to see someone, there's always people around. You just open up your door, right? These aren't huge houses or big spaces, right? So you still have access to people. Most dorms have a community room on the floor that has like a TV, maybe a kitchenette and whatever, where people go and hang out, and there's just more space. So I think, the student might have to be a little bit more intentional about making connections, because they won't necessarily have a roommate. But I think that if if you've chosen a school that gives you a good vibe and has a good campus culture, and you meet your RA, your resident advisor, and you start to make those connections and you engage and, go on the trips, do the pizza parties and all those things, like, you will still make friends. And I've had students, even when I worked at Georgetown, who developed relationships and then ended up rooming with those people, sophomore, junior, senior year. So, there are ways to sort of navigate those pieces. If the student really wants to have a roommate experience, there might be a way to do that. And that would be a great conversation to have with the disability support office. So yes, you're never really alone in a college dorm. I mean, the walls are quite thin. My dorm walls were very thin. Okay. Scholarships available for students with physical disabilities, and how do we find them? That's a great question. So there aren't very many of them, but there are a few. There are a couple like foundations that have specific scholarships. I'm not sure if I don't think Muscular Dystrophy Association has a college scholarship. Avery, do you know if they have one? I don't know if they do.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I really don't think so. While we're also on Stephanie's current question, I think we missed her first one.
Oh.
It was, do schools consider an applicant's disability in the application process?
Oh, it's a great question. So let me just finish this scholarship one. So foundations that work with specific physical disabilities are a great place to look. There are some lists if you Google online, but most of those things are catering towards more like learning disabilities, ADD, autism types of disabilities. I have a Facebook group, and I think there's a link on my info sheet too. And sometimes people share, or if I see a scholarship that might be relevant, I share it there. So that could be another resource too, to sort of poke around and look for those things. And then go to the individual university websites too, and look at their financial aid pages to see if they have a list of scholarships, or connect with the Disability Support Office to see if they know of any scholarships at that school, which is a good segue to talk about the first question about the application. So when a student's completing their college application, there's no checkbox that says, do you have a disability? Check this box. The student can choose whether or not they want to disclose their disability in their personal essay, or if your student has had sort of gaps in education, maybe they've had multiple surgeries or they've missed out on school, and so there's gaps in their transcript. There's a section of the Comment app where a student can write down sort of why there is this gap in their education or what was occurring. So the question that then usually people ask me is it a bad idea to disclose your disability in the application? And I think it's a reasonable question to ask, but I feel like nowadays diversity, equity, and inclusion is a big topic in sort of the college application experience and on college campuses, period. My personal opinion is that disability is an aspect of diversity, and I think that any college would want to have people with all kinds of differences on their college campus in order to enrich the experience for everyone, right? So I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to write about your disability in your application, especially if it's in a personal essay, especially if you're telling a compelling story, right? If you're telling your story about, what occurs with you and where you're going, how far you've come and where you hope to go. I think that can be a really compelling essay for someone, and it would be unique because we know that students with physical disabilities are such a small portion of the population of students who are going on to college. So, that is that's my take. I hope that answered the question. Oh, and I saw that Rachel put in the Every Life Foundation Rare Scholarship, which is a great scholarship. I think that's $5,000, right? Yeah, I think so. So, you know, that's a good chunk of change. So, and I should also say too, that that also means that if you disclose a disability in the application, once the student gets accepted to the university, they still have to go to the disability support office to request accommodation. So that doesn't cover you. The admissions office and the disability office don't talk to each other. So that also means that you can go and talk to the disability support office, and the information they don't pick up the phone and call the admissions department and say, don't accept this person. That doesn't happen. It's completely illegal. And quite frankly, universities are so siloed that many times one department has no idea what the other department is doing, which is also a good tip too. So when you're on a tour and you're talking to admissions department people, and you ask them a question, something accessibility or disability focused, they might not give you the right information, or they might not know the answer. So if you have specific accessibility, disability related questions, those really need to go to the disability support office, and don't rely on what the admissions people say, even if they are well-intentioned people. There's just a lot of myths that occur during that process. How much the Medicaid waiver covers for caretakers. It depends on your personal situation. And people here on this call might have more experience with this than me, but you get approved for a certain number of hours. And then you can use that approval to work with agencies that take Medicaid waivers. Your state also, this is an individual state issue as well. So your state might also pay parents, guardians, family members to be care attendants too. So that's another thing that sometimes emerges for people when they're looking at this. Someone also said, be aware of schools that take you on separate tours. We are finding out it means there's not a lot of access on those campuses. Right. So two things to know here. First, because it sounds like this person is going on tours, they've probably encountered this. When you go to sign up for a tour, there may or may not be a space where you can indicate that you need an accessible tour. Most typical college tours, the tour guide is walking backwards, going up and down stairs. They're several miles long. They might be 45 minutes to an hour total. You're doing a lot of walking and navigating campus. So it could be smart to request an accessible tour, but that might mean that you also want to make sure that the tour guide actually knows the accessible routes on campus. Here's a hot tip for everybody. Generally, and this is the way that I like to look at campus maps and stuff, is you can put in the name of the school and put in accessible campus map and see if they have a map that marks A, all of the accessible entrances, but B, all of the accessible routes on the campus. Some schools don't have an accessible campus map. That doesn't mean that they're a terrible place. It just means that nobody's probably ever asked them for it. But it's worth sort of looking at what they make available and what they're putting forward facing as a way to vet the schools. So that's something that you can look at too on most of their websites. Someone asked about, doesn't it also vary by state depending on resources available? I'm not sure if that's in reference like specifically to the Medicaid question, or if that's about, oh yeah, benefits. Yeah. Everything is state dependent when you're dealing with Medicaid and what your state covers. So that's something to consider and think about. Oh yeah, so this person said all schools are going to hold themselves up as, I'm guessing that's handicap friendly, but how do you really know or find out? So in the list of resources that I had, there United Spinal put out a 20 most wheelchair friendly campuses guide. So that's a good starting point in terms of the campuses that are the most physically accessible. Now, the question is, do you, the student, or does your student actually want to go to one of those campuses and go to one of those schools? Which the answer might be yes or no. I think the best way to find out is to first, like for your student, for your student to start their college search like any other student based on interest. What are they interested in? What sort of culture do they want? What are they looking for in a college experience? And then actually going and visiting some of those campuses, checking them out, seeing if they have a disability club on campus, a student organization, if they have a disability cultural center, which are popping up more at campuses too, because they might be able to connect with other students who use wheelchairs on campus and just see what their experience has been like. But nothing beats that in-person sort of campus tour to actually see if it's going to be a good fit for that student. So that is my opinion.
If there aren't any other questions, we'll start to wrap up here.
Yeah, I was so happy to be here with everybody, and I put my website in so that you can check it out. And the website will take you, if you want all my links to social media and stuff, they're all on there. And if you want to email me, I think I put my email in, but I will put it in here again so that if you want to email me and connect and ask some questions, I'm totally happy to engage with everybody.
All right, I'm just gathering some resources that we can put in the chat. Okay. So yeah, I did just want to mention that we have many different resources and content in a variety of formats open to the community. So we have a great group of young adult affected community members who meet every other Friday for happy hours via Zoom. It'd be great to have you join there. And you can get more acquainted virtually with other members as a fun kind of social opportunity. They're a very relaxed and welcoming environment. We also have a program that is designed to help facilitate peer-to-peer conversations like this one, but a little more one-on-one. It's great to connect with someone or a family who are traveling along the same journey as you. We also have the young adult resource page. There are a variety of resources on there, from healthcare to education, to adaptive driving. So feel free to check that out as well. I put the link to those into the chat. I do also just want to thank Annie and Accessible College. It is not easy to get a group together on Zoom and feel so connected in such a short amount of time. It has been an incredible experience gaining your insight, and I for sure know that as questions come up after we close it out tonight, I'm sure people will reach out. So Annie put the link to her website in the chat if you want to stay up to date on what Accessible College has to offer. You'll also have this recording to refer back to as well. It'll be available for on-demand viewing on Cure CMD's YouTube channel in the coming days. We'll let people know when that comes available. But yeah, if you have any other questions following the session, please reach out to us at outreach@curecmd.org. And if any of them are for Annie to answer, we'll be sure to pass them along to her as well. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great night.